Break with Rachel V. Hill, taking a daily look at the biggest stories in Denver sports and interacting live with you, the Coffee Break fam. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of joe, and enjoy your coffee break. Here's your host, Rachel V. Hill.
Happy Monday, everybody. It's a unique Monday because it's one of the only Mondays of the football season where we aren't coming off of a stressful, anxiety-filled Sunday related to Broncos football, positively or negatively. The Broncos are on a mini bye week with the Carolina Panthers coming up next. But we got to see a lot of other NFL action, including the debut of a familiar face in Broncos country, which is Russell Wilson. And there is quite literally no one better to have been able to come in and discuss today's events and this weekend's events with me than the one and only James Merilatt, who is here and aptly dressed in his Russell Wilson Steelers jersey that he promised everyone he would buy. James, how are you feeling on this morning?
I am great. Now, you said we're coming off a Sunday when it wasn't stressful and Broncos related. I got to tell you, it was stressful for me yesterday. It was Broncos related, but it was a good Sunday night. I'll put it that way. I was rooting hard for Russ last night, not just so I could, don the jersey and
that factored into it. Not
be
at all,
validated
sure.
as being right.
Purely for the love of the sport.
I just, I think Russ gets a bad rep. I think he's a good guy. I was rooting for him to turn it around. And what a debut as they go out and they just demolish the Jets. 31 unanswered points. That was quite the show he put on.
First of all, I don't want to let it go entirely. Does Russ really get a bad rep, or is a good percentage of the bad rep that he gets self-inflicted in a lot of ways? Like, does he not open himself up to some of those slings and arrows?
He does. And look, even last night during the pregame intros, I thought what he said, instead of saying he's from University of Wisconsin or whatever, it's a whole bunch of Badgers.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, come on, Russ, you're your own worst enemy. So yes, he does. But I got to say, like, some of the things he does, they're worthy of a little needling. There are plenty of other truly bad guys out there.
Yep.
One of which got hurt yesterday that deserve no sympathy, no grace, no whatever. Russ isn't a bad dude. He's just a little cheesy. That's all.
Yeah, it's the way that he presents. He's like, I saw somebody put this on social media, and they're like, if AI was a quarterback, it would talk like Russell Wilson. Like, he just has these pre-scripted things, and he'll start a sentence and that plane will take off and you never know when it's going to land. He might go through the entire offensive quality control staff and thanking the backup running back and all of that. And but I will say, I was a big fan of Russell Wilson when he was in Seattle, and I totally bought into the let Russ cook movement that was kind of self-originated by him and some of the fan base at the time. And I've never ever seen a football player go from hero to villain faster than Russell Wilson. I mean, you've had NFL players who've been involved in awful, ugly domestic violence disputes and federal charges and things of that nature. And they had an appropriate response. Russ's went from hero to zero based on corniness and some bumpy play. So I can understand and be empathetic a little bit, to a certain degree, but it looked rough in the first quarter.
It did. It certainly did. And, look, the fact that it turned so quickly here, I think had to do with how much they gave up for him, the contract they gave him. It was all those kind of things.
Plus Sean Payton, plus 6 or 7 years of horrible football.
The bar was so
had nothing
high,
to do with him.
Right? He was going to come in here and he was going to solve everything that had ailed this team since Super Bowl 50. And he just, wasn't up to that task for a lot of reasons, right? The Nathaniel Hackett experience didn't help. The lack of playmakers on this roster, which suddenly now everybody is talking about. That didn't help. The list goes on and on and on. A lot of it was himself, right? The first year he thought he needed to get heavier and be a pocket passer. He was not a particularly good player at that weight. He was much better his second year in Denver. And they went 8-9. They were in the playoff race till Christmas Eve. 26 touchdowns, 8 picks, like something to build upon. And that's been my argument the whole time with the whole Russ thing. Like, do I think he was perfect here? No, he took way too many sacks. The fumbles were ridiculous. A lot of the cheesy things he said were ridiculous. But I thought they had something to build upon, and I think it was a shame to throw it all out. One of the things I think those the most unfair bad rep that he has is that he's not popular with his teammates. I watching the game last night over and over and over again on the sideline, he seemed like one of the guys to me. He seemed like he was, whether it was his receivers or whoever else, Justin Fields interaction. Like, I think he's always been a really good teammate. I think the thing here with like his own office and stuff like that, like, give me the guy who wants to work too much, over the guy who's playing video games. They never have to put Kyler Murray.
You brought up the own office thing and all that too. There's a difference. I mean, I actually was thinking about this after the game too, which was that, obviously Russ played much better than I expected, much better than I think a lot of people expected. And just by and large with his stat line, I mean, 265 passing yards, 3 total touchdowns because he had the 1-yard sneak and on 109 QB rating. I mean, shoot, with what we've been experiencing, offensively this year, I think any of us would take that kind of game. And
without a doubt.
Yeah. And so I was watching that and I was like, you know what? Is this going to be a situation where Russ becomes yet another quarterback to go off and play well after being here in Denver? And it's all for different circumstances. In Russ's case, I think this will be the situation where we just got the wrong Russ. We got the Russ who was high on his own supply, feeling himself. It was all Pete Carroll and John Schneider's fault, and they kept him chained and didn't let him cook and all that. And then he came here and it crashed and burned by and large over 2 years. And then Pittsburgh, we gave up all the drafts to pick his ball, paid all that money. We cut him. And then Pittsburgh picks him up for nothing. And he's been humbled and kind of humiliated in a public sense, league wide. And now he's reinvigorated with a different mindset. And maybe it's like, well, what if Denver had gotten that Russ instead of the let Russ cook Russ?
No doubt.
You know what I mean? And I was thinking about that. I'm like, did we date the girl before she found the one that she's going to marry? You know what I mean?
Probably. And look, he definitely bit off more than he could chew that first year here in Denver. He thought he was this type of a quarterback or wanted to turn into this type of quarterback.
He was on a mission to prove people wrong that said he couldn't be a pocket passer, that he was just a mobile quarterback who was faded.
But I'm one of those people who I'm not going to criticize you if you bite off more than you could chew. Like that, we all kind of should. Yeah, we should aspire to do that, right? You want to push yourself and stretch yourself and all the rest of that stuff. I will criticize Russ or anybody else if they bite off more than they can chew and refuse to admit it. Stubbornly just insist there, right? And he didn't, right? So even that first year when they brought in Jer Bear and he said, you got to give up the office. No problem. Okay, that's cool. The second year he came back and he looked just like he did when he was in Seattle. He was more mobile. He was able to move around and like, okay, you got back to what made you Russ. I think the 1 year thing, yeah, you're right. It was bad timing. I'm like, that's not the year you wanted to have him. The Sean Payton thing was never going to work ever.
Nope. Oil and water.
Because he wants to run his offense, which look, we've seen it for 7 games. Are any of us dazzled with Sean Payton's offense?
I would say no. I think by and large it's been a little bit underwhelming. I don't want to discredit the lack of just overall playmakers and just quality of play at the skill player positions that the Broncos have had, because it hasn't been great. No, I mean and so there's a certain degree of it becomes that dichotomy of like, you can hire a 5-star chef, but if you have no ingredients in the kitchen, what do you expect them to make? And I'm not saying that that's entirely the way the scale is tipped, but I do think there's a little bit of a balance there. And, unfortunately it becomes one of those, well, you won't really know how far the scale tips in either direction until you go out and invest in more playmakers and do that. But then you're buying more time. And then you might get 2 or 3 years down the road and realize he just wasn't a very good cook.
Yeah. And it's whether we're talking about Sean Payton or we're talking about Russ, so I think that same thing applies. And the other part of the Russ thing is if you go back and look, it's all about the end result. So there's no such thing as moral victories. But if you go back and look at how close it was to working here, right? His first ever game as a Bronco, they go up to Seattle, throws for 340 yards. They fumble twice at the 1 yard line.
Melvin and Devonte.
They have a chance to kick a field goal to win it. Even before that, if Graham Glasgow doesn't get blown up, the swing pass to Javonte Williams is going to get him down to like the 15-yard line. He's got no one in front of him. It's a chip shot field goal at that point. There's the butterfly effect, right? You win that first game in Seattle. How does it snowball? The game here, the infamous terrible game against Indianapolis. He's got KJ Hamler wide open for the game-winning touchdown, doesn't see him, doesn't throw it. Like the Hail Mary game against Washington, and they don't get the 2-point conversion.
Oh my
like,
gosh.
The list
Well,
goes
they were up like 30 points in that game against
on and
Washington.
on and on and on, though, right? Like there's so many of those.
And then you also factor in on the back end, like how differently would we be looking at that second season with Russ if they didn't go on that 5-game win streak and just ride an unbelievable, uncharacteristic turnover streak and all that. There's all kinds of variables and things you can throw in. I definitely think that the case of Sean Payton and Russ was just oil and water, two things that just don't mix, and it just wasn't going to work. And Russ was the weaker link to get rid of because you had established that you were coming off Nathaniel Hackett. So it's hard to find good coaching in the NFL, just like it's hard to find good quarterback play.
I think
but Nathaniel Hackett's incompetence definitely didn't help Russ.
No.
From an ego standpoint of kind of give it like, hey, you got the private office, you got all that, you run the show, we'll let you cook and all that. And just from an in-game management and calling an offense, because I think it's pretty clear if Aaron Rodgers had never linked up with Nathaniel Hackett, that guy would be flipping burgers.
Without a doubt. I mean, he's already lost, his play calling duties in New York, and he's got his quarterback, and it's still not working. But I disagree of who would have been easier to get rid of because there's no salary cap for coaches.
That's
you
true.
just eat the money.
Yeah.
And they're eating money.
And it's
anyway.
easy to do when it's not it's easy for us to say when it's not your money.
Right.
Too, right?
Exactly. But they were eating money either way.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you what, though, watching the game and through the first quarter, and I tweeted this, it looked like we were watching an old timers game because Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson at that point, I was like, geez, neither of these guys looked like themselves. Now, Russ turned it around.
Yeah.
Rodgers, if you want to talk about who's washed up, that guy is.
Listen, I don't. No, you don't. We're just one more Aaron Rodgers buddy away from that team being a juggernaut. They just need to bring in Randall Cobb, and bring Jermichael Finley out of retirement. Or what's Donald Driver up to?
They are that team's a mess.
How do you think Robert Saleh feels right now? I would have loved to have sat on a couch and watched that game with Robert Saleh.
I think he was sitting there with his feet up. Probably had a cocktail in hand and was just enjoying it as it went down, and then maybe go outside afterward, have a smoke a cigar, and just be like, "Yep, told you so." On the opposite end of guys who are straight up just not having a good time, how about Devonte Adams, who managed to, in a span of 7 days, be on a 2-4 team that loses to the Steelers in Vegas, get traded to a 2-4 team the next week, who turns around and loses to he lost to the Steelers in week 6 and week 7 in a span of 7 days. Pretty remarkable, really. That's who they would play, right? For the first game. But, he's certainly going to help. He's a great receiver. They will bounce back. That offense will get a boost from Devonte Adams. Even if Aaron Rodgers wasn't the quarterback and they didn't have that chemistry and that, because those two clearly clicked. I mean, they were showing graphics all the time leading up to the game about the amount of no quarterback and receiver had more yards and touchdowns during the 3-year span, the last 3 years that Rodgers and Devontae were together than those two. It was like Brady to Randy Moss back in the day. Yeah, he'll definitely help them. It's funny though. Go back to when the Jets played the Broncos. Talk about one moment kind of changing the course of things. If Greg Zuerlein makes that field goal at the end of the game, gosh. Right? Does Robert Saleh still have a job? Is Nathaniel Hackett still calling plays? Is Devonte Adams in New York? Did they then go to London and not lose? So many different things could have happened that it really can just be one moment, one kick, one play. They always talk about it. NFL Network had it for a long time, that showed Turning Point. And it was like, here's the one play in each game that kind of changed the course of things. It's not just for a game. It can be for a season. It can be for careers. Pretty big. The butterfly effect is massive when you talk about. The Greg Zuerlein kick was huge. One small thing. Now, I am of the opinion that the Steelers made this decision to start Russell Wilson because despite being 4-2 with Justin Fields, who had some fumbles that I'm sure he would love to have back, but also contributed 10 total touchdowns to 1 interception, and had him at 4-2. I think they made this move because they know that they don't want to keep both of these guys, and the trade deadline's coming up, and we've already seen the snowball start to run. And I think if you don't play Russ at all, he has no trade value because last he was on the field, he got cut, and a team wanted to take the biggest dead cap hit in NFL history to get rid of him. And so now I feel like they're in a situation where Justin Fields put a body of work together for 6 games. They're going to put Russ in because that's who they maybe wanted to go with in the first place. And if Russ plays great,
then maybe Fields becomes an attractive trade target before the trade deadline. Or if Russ doesn't, then, you can just make a move and get on and just go forward with one. And then maybe you don't even keep that other one in the offseason. They may be in a situation where they're ready to wipe the deck. But they're sitting at 5-2 now. The Broncos are sitting at 4-3. Pretty comparable positioning in the AFC. Do you, and I'm asking you honestly.
Okay.
Do you think that these two teams in the Broncos and the Steelers will have a comparable record at the end of the year if Russ starts the rest of the year?
No, I think the Steelers are going to win 10, 11 games. I think the Broncos are going to get to 7 or 8.
Okay, so I was going to say, because comparable would be like 1 or 2 wins.
Yeah, no.
So if you're saying there's a 3-game difference, that's enough of us.
I think the Steelers are a playoff team. I do not think the Broncos are a playoff team. I think the Broncos.
Now the Steelers do have an advantageous situation in that the Browns are a dumpster fire.
Correct.
The Bengals have had a horrible start to the season.
Correct.
And the Ravens are the Ravens. That's, one of those 4 teams is always going to be in the top of the conversation.
Yeah, and I mean they both have great defenses. So I think that's going to keep both teams in most games. I just think Pittsburgh has a much better offense at this point, better balance, better quarterback. Pickens is a better player than anybody the Broncos have at a skill position. So I think that, and I think they have a better head coach. So I think that's going to get them there. Plus, we'll see how schedules play out. Things change so quickly with one injury here or there. But I think they have a little bit of an easier schedule. Look, the Broncos, and I've been saying this since they beat Carolina, and people think it's an insult. And I get it because it kind of sounds like one, but it's not. They're the best JV team in the NFL, meaning they can beat all the bad teams. All right, well, that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
This is a team that had
it's not something they've always done.
Right, the 12th overall pick. They had a number 5 pick not that long ago. Like, being above all the bad teams, because there are a lot of bad teams in the league, puts you basically in the middle of the pack. So they're going to win those games. They should blow out Carolina this week. They're not going to beat Baltimore. They're not going to beat Kansas City. They got a chance to prove people like me wrong with those 2 games.
Well, I was going to say, I think 7. They're over under win total at the start of the season with what, 5 games, 5.5, something like that.
Yes, 5.5. Because Sean was talking about
5.5. Because I remember it was similar to what the Buffs was, despite having like 5 more games.
I think they're both 5.5.
Yeah. So I do think if you look at the schedule, now you have to factor in that the defense is going to be continue to play at a high level, and you have to factor in that there's going to be some upward trajectory with both assumptions. But when you're projecting toward the future, you have to make certain assumptions. I don't think it's unreasonable to see a path where the Broncos get to 8 or 9 games in the win column this season. They can lose both games to Baltimore and Kansas City. They should beat the brakes off of Carolina. They've got an Atlanta team that can be a coin flip. They can Kirk Cousins, my guy, can throw for 500 yards on Matt Ryan night, or he could lay an egg, in prime time. You've got a Cleveland team that's in shambles. You've already lost one to the Chargers, but that's a team historically that you've been able to split with. So it's not unreasonable to think that. The Raiders are a mess, and they just lost their number 1 weapon. So you could factor in potentially beating them again. And then, normally you'd say week 17, if it's like against the Chiefs, maybe you get a cheap win there. I don't think so, because I think that team is, even though they're 6-0, it's like the ugliest 6-0 that I've seen in a long time. And I think that they might have more to play for in terms of home field advantage and seeding than people think by the end of the year. But I don't think it's unreasonable if they win a coin flip game against Atlanta, and maybe you got Indianapolis in there.
Yeah, they got
Bengals.
Some very winnable home games, right? And starts this week with Carolina. Indianapolis is a very winnable game that's here. Cleveland's a very winnable game that's here. That's 3. That gets you to 7.
Yeah.
If you just be the best JV team in the league, which is what I think they are,
which should be the floor,
then can you pull off an upset or 2? And some of them would be minor upsets. Which going into Vegas,
I was going to say every good team, let alone great team in sports, has to win a couple of games that they're not supposed to. You might lose a game that you were supposed to win because that's just sports, but you're going to have to, I feel like we talk about it in hockey all the time. Like, your goalie's got to steal you X amount of games per season.
The Tampa Bay game falls into this category.
Yes.
Right. Tampa's not a great team, but nobody thought they'd go down there and win.
I'd argue the Jets game is in that category too, even though they've fallen off.
Yeah.
That was an ugly game against a Hall of Fame quarterback on the road, coming off of a big win, which is always a letdown trap. So yeah, I'll agree with you. I think they should have won one of the first 2 games of the year.
Yeah.
I didn't think they were going to win the second 2.
Okay, so the 3 games, 3 cupcakes, which there's no cupcake in the NFL, but right now they look like
relatively
cupcakes,
speaking.
right? Carolina, Indianapolis, Cleveland. Those look like cupcakes. Now you're at 7. So you got to go pull off a couple of minor upsets, go to Vegas and win, beat Cincinnati here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of go to LA and win, where it's typically basically a Broncos home game. There are a lot of opportunities in there to steal 1 or 2. You steal 2, you're at 9.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're in the conversation for the playoffs. So I think that's I don't think it's going to happen, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities.
Okay,
either.
so and let's just hypothetically say that they go down this path. They beat the teams they're supposed to, which would put them at 7. Factoring in that they made the decisions that they made, they got rid of Russ, they cut players like Tim Patrick and Justin Simmons and others that they didn't necessarily have to, especially in the case of Tim Patrick. I definitely think you could have found a way to make that work and would have been better for it. Factoring in that this was supposed to be somewhat of a rebuild, take your lumps, take your medicine year, and they've kind of slowed some of that momentum toward that conversation down. How many wins would it take for you, who is clearly a Russell Wilson fan, was not a fan of the move to bring in Bo Nix, and has been one of the louder critics when called upon to critique? How many wins would it take for the Broncos this season for you to be like, you know what? They got out of that what they were supposed to. That they matched the level of expectation that I would place on them, given all those other parameters.
9. Because that'd be a step ahead of last year.
Right. You improve by 1 game, even in a rebuild type of situation where you cut a lot of costs, took on a lot of dead money, and you drafted a young quarterback. I think that's fair as well.
Because I think they could have got to 9 last year if Russ had played the last 2 games. They wound up splitting them.
Yeah.
So
you break the streak of losing seasons,
correct,
which has just plagued us since 2016.
You're in the hunt all year long.
You're that team just under the wild card bar,
Yep. And so I think that'd be a step in the right direction.
With the expectation that the next year you're 10-7 and you're in the conversation. Because
I still think if they'd have built upon what they had last year and kept Russ, not taking on the dead cap, drafted Brock Bowers, et cetera, they're a team that's going to win 10 games this year. They're a team that's going to be in the playoffs. So to some extent, to have this be the right move, you could make the argument, well, then they need to make the playoffs. That's unrealistic with a rookie quarterback and all the change. But they do have to have a step in the right direction. Plus, it has to be it's also, how does it look getting there? If all it is the defense carries them to it, and Bo Nix looks in week 18 like he did in week 1, which right now I don't think he's looked any better as the season's gone on. I've seen no improvement. If he gets better and better and better and they get to 9 wins, like, okay, I can buy into that, because then you're thought of you get to 10, 11, whatever.
I'll be honest with you. If he looks better and better and better and they only get to 7 wins, but by week 17, week 18, he's throwing confidently from the pocket. He doesn't have happy feet. He's not overthrowing and underthrowing 2 wide receivers that could have scored a touchdown on the same play. He's not doing those things. I'll even be okay with 7-8 wins if he looks like, okay, going into the start of next season, we're firing on all cylinders.
I would agree, but right now he's right-handed Tebow. That's what he is.
No, I think that's fair, because just like Tebow, the staple of Tebow mania was finding ways to win games that seemed like you had no business winning.
Correct.
It was and it took fortuitous things from the other team. It was what was the running back's name who ran out of bounds?
It was Barber. Was it Marion Barber?
Yeah, Marion Barber or something like that. Ran out of bounds when he wasn't supposed to. You had, quirky field position or coaching decisions with Miami, and you had all this stuff where, Prater, whoever it was kicking a record tying field goal to force overtime, and you win it in overtime or whatever it was. So there was a little bit of that. You needed Zerline to miss that kick. You needed there to be this monsoon type of rainstorm at MetLife, and you caught the Bucs on the biggest overlook of the season so far, because they had just come off of pummeling the team.
You got the Saints when they were without a bunch of starters.
Yeah, they had like a 15-person injury list starting Spencer Rattler.
The Raiders come in here, and it's the week of the Devonte Adams drama. Yeah. Like, they've had
fortuitous.
Their schedule is set up that, especially with that defense, they should be better than 4-3.
Because I'll tell you this: you had mentioned, like, hey, if it's the defense carrying him the whole way and Bo doesn't look good, that is historically how Mike Tomlin has earned most of his winning seasons in the NFL, especially post Big Ben.
But he knows now.
Yeah.
Like when they were talking about it during the game of like when he was in 2 Super Bowls, I'm like, that was a long time ago. That was like when Sean Payton was.
I was going to say, it's been a minute.
So he's been to the playoffs.
It was the Cardinals one, right? Was his last one? They beat
the Cardinals. They lost to Aaron Rodgers in the Packers.
That's what it was right after that. Yeah.
So he's been to the playoffs almost every year. They're like the 7 seed who gets in and then goes to Kansas City and just gets boat race.
Yeah, they get boat race.
It's never a competitive game.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of why he made this change. Is like, yeah, we've
hit our ceiling. Yeah,
we can follow this formula and get into the playoffs. And that comes
from being well coached. They have a great culture, and they just.
But to win big, he knows he has to have a big time quarterback. Does he? He didn't know for sure Russ was going to be it, but I thought they did a really good job explaining it. You know, Mike Tirico and Chris Collinsworth of why they made the move, and they want to see if there's this upside with Russ. And if there is, great. If there's not, go back to Fields and it's done. It's over. Plus, you answer that question in the locker room, right? If you're winning games 15-13, you're like players aren't dumb.
You're at least looking at what else is out there.
Yeah, like, hey, are we going to continue to get good breaks, or do we need to?
And
do something else?
They were down. What was it, 15-6, and then they ended up scoring 30.
Then Russ opened the kitchen and started cooking.
Yeah, man. Well, another team that is sitting pretty well, not as well as I think they would hope, or that I hope that they would be, is the Buffs in the Big 12. They were able to bounce back. They're in the middle of their feline tour. They had Wildcat, now they got a Bearcat. Coming up.
A lot of cats.
So a lot of cats. And they responded nicely to what I thought was an absolute can't ever have it heartbreaking finish against Kansas State. You can't, if you're the Buffs, you cannot go up against what I believe is the best team in the Big 12, or at least arguably so from a talent perspective, have the go-ahead touchdown with just over 2 minutes left and give up a 2-play touchdown drive and just suck all that momentum out of a vacuum. And that's what they did.
Yeah.
They lost the game. They still had a chance. They lost the game. I thought it was a greedy play call. I don't care about was it pass interference?
It was, but it would have been. Yeah. I think the ref thought, I'm not bailing him out.
It's 4th and 2. Yeah. It's maybe even less than 2. Just pick up the first down. You don't have to throw the laser ball to the sideline, but that's in the past. That win would have opened up a lot of conversational doors for them. We'd really be talking Big 12 title.
I don't think those conversations are outside the realm of possibility.
I don't think they are either. And if you look at where they're at up in the standings, they have a handful of teams in front of them, but they got a little help. It would have been nice if Iowa State or BYU, might have dropped, but Texas Tech losing was big for them. They've got a game coming up against the team directly in front of them in Cincinnati. So that's an opportunity to climb one more rung up that ladder at a bare minimum. I don't think they're out, but they need a little more help than they did before.
They do, but I was talking about it this morning with Stokely and Evans. They're in an interesting situation. Look, none of us know how the playoffs going to unfold, right? We know the automatic bids and some of that kind of stuff. But if they go 10-2, now that's getting way ahead of ourselves. That's winning 5 more in a row. If they go 10-2, and for whatever reason these standings don't change, and they don't make the Big 12 title game, 10-2, that team. The ratings that they bring.
That's what it is. That's what it is right there.
They're in play for an at-large
because
bid.
From a talent perspective, a 10-2 SEC team, and I would argue the right 10-2 Big 10 team, if it's Ohio State, Penn State, Ohio State losing to Oregon is going to cause some problems for some teams that thought they might they might whatever. If Ohio State doesn't win the Big 10.
Now the trick could be, how do you take Colorado over whoever loses the Big 12 title game?
Right.
That would be the argument. But if they're, let's say they're all three.
Right. If they're facing an undefeated team.
But if let's say it's a tiebreaker that keeps them out of that game, and they're all 10-2, and K-State goes and plays Iowa State, and K-State loses by 40 in that game.
Yeah.
They're not taking K-State.
No.
They would say Colorado. They win that game if Travis Hunter doesn't.
They left even in a non-expanded playoff format. This is what we all need to remember when it comes to the college football landscape too. In the CFP era, it is not about truly the 4 best teams. It's about the 4 best teams subjective to the opinion of the committee, subjective to what is going to draw the best ratings and the most eyeballs, and the pedigree of the program. The expanded playoff allows for less frustrated fan bases, but Georgia, prior to this season, lost 1 football game in 2 years, and it was in the SEC championship to Alabama. They got upset, and they were left out of that playoff in favor of Alabama, who then lost to Michigan, and yada, yada, yada. You can't tell me that a football team that goes undefeated national champion, then goes undefeated through their regular season, loses in the SEC championship in an upset, is not one of the 4 best teams in college football. But they weren't.
Agreed.
According to the committee. So the concept of them not being one of the 4 best teams on paper or in the standings or whatever it is, or even 8 best teams, doesn't matter if they will draw, and they will draw.
Yeah, again, playing the hypothetical. Iowa State beats K-State in the Big 12 title game. Iowa State's in.
Mm-hmm.
K-State or Colorado if you're the committee. If they're both 10-2.
It's got to be. Every game that the Buffs have played this season, this is a fact, has been the highest rated and most viewed game of that opponent's entire schedule. They are a eyeball and ratings machine when it comes to college football.
And all the committee has to have is a sliver of a argument to make.
Yes, they just have to have
why they should be.
They have to be able to have a 30-second script that
Correct.
Commissioner, whatever his name is, can get up there during the Selection Sunday show and explain what it is. They'll team up for the softball. He'll say it, and then it will go away.
They're 9-1 in their last 10 games. Their only loss came when they didn't have their best player for 3/4 of the game.
Yep.
And they lost in the final 2 minutes of the game. That's the argument. Okay, and they have 2 guys that might go 1-2 in the draft.
Yep. Yeah, they have a Heisman front runner, not front runner anymore, but he's still in the top 3. And Travis Hunter, who, by the way, they didn't even need for 2.5 quarters of that football game against Arizona to blow him out.
Yeah, they're going to have to limit his snaps here moving forward.
Let's talk about that, because
I think
I
you
agree
play him
with
on
you.
offense. I think on defense you're making tackles. That's not easy on the shoulder.
I agree with you on the shoulder thing. I will say that I think his impact is more valuable on the defensive side.
They've got more depth at receiver.
Yes, if you can get the LeJohntay Westers of the world, because they're without Jimmy Horn for stretches of the season, Omarion Miller, all that. So they've had some injuries to some key players at that position, but their depth is so much stronger.
I think
at wide receiver.
I think their wide receiver room is better than the Broncos.
Shoot, I mean, it's not that stiff of a competition,
right? Travis Hunter and Cortland Sutton. I think Travis Hunter's better, and then the other guys, do you take?
Yeah. I think Travis Hunter, bar none, is more athletic for sure. You could argue that Cortland Sutton has had way more experience at the NFL level and how to maneuver that stuff. But yes, the Travis Hunter has a much higher ceiling, at least it looks right now, than what Cortland Sutton is right now.
It's just
But then yes, you're going to tell me that Omarion Miller, that Jimmy Horn couldn't be Josh Reynolds,
Troy Franklin,
Devon Vele, yeah.
I don't know how much time those guys get.
LeJohntay Wester can't be, Marvin Mims.
And I know it sounds silly, and people will say that of Alabama could beat the Jaguars. No, they couldn't.
Ever.
But I do think, just from a position group standpoint, especially because of the guy they have at the top of the list, I think there's a good argument to be made that they got a better wide receiver room in Boulder than at Dove Valley.
Man, I don't love that. I feel like there's an argument to be made there. And obviously we'll see how it pans out, as several of those guys are going to go to the NFL, as well as Shedeur. On the way out, I do want to touch on one thing, because I'm going to be honest, I have not been as excited about baseball as I am today after the conclusion of the championship series. You are going to have the New York Yankees and the LA Dodgers squaring off in the World Series. This will be the 12th time that it's happened, and the Yankees are just continuing to add on to we have the most World Series appearances as anybody else. But we haven't had this specific matchup between these two teams since 1981. So if you're a baseball fan in your late 30s, early 40s, you've never seen this. And I could argue there's never been a bigger matchup between these two teams than this right here.
I'm with you. The star power on each team. I can't, as a Rockies fan, it's hard for me to root for the evil empire that is the Yankees, and the Dodgers are in that same category. And so there's part of me, when the Dodgers won yesterday, I'm like, oh, what a shock. The Dodgers and the Yankees in the World Series. But it hasn't happened since 1981. It's been 43 years since it happened. But it is that sport. It's a non-salary cap sport. Mm-hmm. The teams that can outspend everybody are going to be there every single year with a chance to go to the World Series.
These are 2 of the 3 biggest payrolls in baseball. But in my opinion, these two teams in these 2 years are showing more for their money than, because they've always been two of the top 3, 4, 5 payrolls in baseball. This year, they're getting the most bang for the buck. This is the first time in Major League Baseball history that 250 home run hitters are going to square off against each other in a World Series. You got Shohei and Aaron Judge. You have the best player in the sport, let alone two-way player, in Shohei Ohtani against one of the league's best hitters in the last decade in Aaron Judge. You've got, like you said, star power galore. Then even if you're a casual baseball fan, you start rolling off Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Giancarlo Stanton, Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman. These are names that you know.
Yeah.
You know?
And there's part of me that, sure, as a Rockies fan, I would have loved to see the World Series be the Royals and the Padres. But that would draw crickets.
You got the two biggest markets, coast to coast.
If you're a baseball fan and you kind of want baseball to get back to what it used to be, this is the best case scenario, because if they can't draw ratings with this, they're done. They're never going to draw.
Not only are they going to, here's my prediction. Not only are they going to draw ratings, regardless of the series outcome, regardless of how many games it goes, not only are they going to draw ratings that are significantly larger than what they've experienced in previous years, because you're getting markets 1 and 2, New York and LA. You're going to get 10% of the Japanese population watching this series, as was evident in the last few series. That was actually a stat that it averaged out to, based on the Japanese viewership, it averaged out to almost 10% of Japan's population was watching these games. And that is the Shohei Ohtani factor. And I'm going to treat this, since I'm hosting the show today, I'm going to declare this a safe space. I wanted this matchup. I have not rooted against the Dodgers this entire postseason, because at the end of the day, if my team is not in it, and this is just a personal thing for me, and I'm sure I'm going to get blasted for this, I want to see the best players play. And I want to see as much. I don't care that he plays for the Dodgers, and that's like enemy number one, because of our division and all of that stuff here for Rockies fans. I want to see as much Shohei Ohtani in the playoffs as I can. I think about the Mike Trouts of the world, who were the best player in the sport for the big stretch of their career and never sniffed a playoff game, let alone a championship, And so I want as much postseason Shohei as I can. If the Dodgers win the World Series, this might be the one year that I'm like, thumbs up, I'm into it.
Yeah, it's a little bit like last year. Look, if the Broncos aren't in the playoffs, might as well be Kansas City and San Francisco. Makes for a great Super Bowl.
Love watching. I love watching. This year it's ugly 90% of the time. I love watching the Chiefs play offense.
People want to, root for the upset, but then a lot of times the upset leads to bad next round. Right?
It leads to a blowout on the other end.
TCU wins in the semifinal game, and then the championship game is awful.
Yeah,
you'll see. Some of these teams get to the Elite Eight or even the Final Four, and then it's just leads to bad games.
Yeah. You get the Cinderella that that makes the run.
Yeah, you want to see Duke in North Carolina or Duke in Kansas.
This is baseball's heavyweight fight.
Yeah, which is great. I haven't watched a ton of baseball in recent years. I've watched a lot of it this year for whatever reason, probably because of the matchups. And I will be glued to the World Series because this matchup is as good as it gets in terms of star power, like you said. Just not quite sure how I can root for both of them to lose.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's two of the most like
rooting for the Yankees. I can't root for the
Dodgers. Who was it? Wasn't there was like it was an actor or somebody said that rooting for the Yankees is like going to Vegas and rooting for the house to win.
It's very true. You're rooting for the IRS.
It is like rooting for the bad guy. Well, this is going to be an interesting sports week, because we've got a few extra days before we really start getting into Broncos stuff, and we just get to enjoy a lot of the other sports that are going on there. The Nuggets are kicking off their season later this year. The Avs have won a couple. They look like they're getting back off the schneid a little bit. I saw somebody was asking in the comments, is it time to give Eustace Ananin a chance? I don't know about that. We're 6 games in. By the way, the last time the Avs started 2-5, they won the Stanley Cup.
I'm back on Thursday with you. That's when the Nuggets open. I am super worried about this Nuggets team. So it's a little 3 days down the road tease.
We love a horizontal tease.
That's right.
Well, can't wait until then. We got a couple of sports days to go in between, but we'll be here to react to it all. So we'll see you tomorrow. And until then, get back to work.